All right, so when we think about the first three PESEL standards, mission and vision and core values leads off with us. And you'll notice a couple of things. The ISLIC standards, as we looked at last week, did also have a focus on mission, vision, and core values. But one of the major changes in the PESEL standards has to do with these two things we call academic press and caring support. So there has to be a culture, a climate that a principal or an educational leader creates where we are going to have a no excuses approach to the way that students learn, and we're going to expect that all students learn at high levels. So we set a vision for that. Really, it's the ideal state that we're trying to achieve. The mission is really going to be the pathway that we choose as an organization to get there. A mission can be very different depending upon the context, depending upon the setting, the capabilities of staff, funding, budgets, you name it. But really more importantly, the core values piece is about what you believe and what there is evidence of in terms of your beliefs as an educational leader. So you're looking at not just what you believe, what your core values are, but really how you instill those core values and how you in others and how you help those others to develop their own core values. So really it's an emphasis on rigor. This is where, and we'll see shortly, we shift into the moral imperative of the educational leader in terms of ensuring that every student, regardless of zip code, has a high quality teacher that greets them at the door each and every day. So when we talk about academic press, one of the major changes in the PESEL standards has to do with the fact that we're also talking about that human component that we talked about in session one. The PESEL standards are very much focused on the work of individuals in the building. It's more pronounced than they were in the ISLIC standards. But we talk about this concept, and I love this quote from Hattie where they say, it's the students themselves in the end, not the teachers, who decide what students will learn. So education is compulsory, and many of our kids do choose to go to school each day. But what they do from bell to bell is really what the important work is. And so how do we develop them as individuals? How do we provide for them? How do we meet their needs? More so than we ever have before. So we look at this idea that though there's standards for educational leaders, at the heart of it, as we've been discussing, is student learning and school improvement. And so when we think about the vision, it's really the why do we do the work? What's our ultimate goal? How are we going to improve? Where are we going to be? Where do we see ourselves? And how do we see ourselves as an organization? The mission is really what we are currently doing, how we're going to get there. We take an assessment of the current state of things and then determine the path that we're going to take to get towards that vision. And then really the core values is about who the people are. The discussion around the standard 3 around equity has been really interesting because for a number of years now we've been talking about equity almost to a point where it doesn't hold as much meaning as it should. And so really the question is, when somebody says they're an equity warrior or they say that they use equitable practices, do they really understand what equity is? Do they understand what equity means? And do they understand how equity looks in a classroom? And so what's the evidence of their beliefs? And so again, when we think about vision, it's really what's on the horizon. The mission can vary. Sometimes it's a nice smooth path that we're taking. Other times it might be a little bit of a rockier road coming from a different direction, but each school, each organization is going to have its own vision, its own mission, and each individual is really going to have its own core values. But just as each individual has core values, so must the organization. And so the discussion that educational leaders have are, what are our core values as an organization? How do we operate, and what do we believe about students and about schooling itself? And so a really powerful exercise is to consider, what are your 4 core values as an educational leader? When you walk through your building each day, what are the top 4 things that you believe about students, about school, community, whatever it may be? But then also to reflect on what's the evidence of that. So if a stranger walks into the building and you say that you believe in the power of relationships, how is somebody going to know that you believe in the power of relationships? And I'll share with you here the core value statements that I had to develop early in my educational leadership career. And it was interesting in terms of, you'll note the date on here is around 2014, which is, a little bit just before I became a principal. It was during my principal internship years. And at that time, I was asked to do the same type of exercise. And I came up with positive relationships, high expectations, highly effective teaching, and community. And so when I think about what my core values as an educational leader are, I invest a lot of time with my staff around highly effective teaching, providing targeted professional development, organizing systems and budgets to make sure that the teachers are well supported so that every kid has that effective teacher standing in front of them. When you think about high expectations, there are no excuses. Just because you are identified as a student living in poverty or your skin is a certain shade, that does not mean that there's an outcome that's predetermined for you. And so we have to have high expectations for all of our kids. That's where our equity work comes in. And so there's evidence of that if you walk around my building. Positive relationships. Each of us is in a school because we want to work. We want to work with children specifically, and we want to make a difference. So what are those relationships that we have? And also, what are the structures that we use to actually build those relationships? A lot of the work that my staff has been doing this year has been around restorative circles, community circles, some of these restorative practices that are intended to disrupt the school to prison pipeline, because the relationships is a key to us not seeing minority students in the office as frequently. So a lot of the professional development, the support that we're providing to teachers in that realm has shown that we're making an improvement in that area. And then also this concept of community. One of the things that we've been really clear about, though, is avoiding a white-centric notion of what community is. That to be an engaged community member, you must show up at the school for the meeting. We've made a number of efforts to improve our outreach into the community, to engage with portions of the community that have not traditionally been a part of that. And so it's been a really, really interesting process for us. But even 5-6 years later, looking back, these are still the 4 things that I really hold true, that are my core values as an educational leader. And one of the things that I try to instill in my staff. And so you want to consider, what are your core values? In the next session, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to write anything, but I'm really going to ask you to talk about what your core values are, and how I would know that you believe those core values, or that you are following those core values as you head in. One of the books that I really recommend is this Professional Standards for Educational Leaders book. It's by Joseph Murphy. He does a phenomenal job of breaking down the standards. He has a lot of writers from the field coming in and sharing their perspectives on what the standards actually mean in practice. And so he talks about this concept of mission. We've talked about vision. We've talked about core values. So if you've got the people with the right beliefs and you've got the vision that you're headed towards, we're looking at developing a mission for the school. It has to be positive. It has to convey a sense of hope. It has to instill those same values that you developed in your core values. It has to be really focused on students, what their outcomes are, and it has to be an honest interpretation of what the needs are. If there's an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had about the race of certain students that don't have the same access, that aren't performing at the same level, then you really do have to focus on that. It has to be academically anchored, continuously reevaluated, but it has to be owned by everyone. And so your job as the educational leader is really to take this concept of a mission, to collaboratively develop with the stakeholders that are going to be responsible for it, and to really hold everyone accountable for it.